Substitutes for leadership. Kerr and Germier use the term substitutes for leadership to describe the characteristics that make leader behaviors irrelevant, unnecessary, and redundant. For example, some characteristics that help subordinates better understand their roles and work processes, or allow them to obtain feedback and rewards from sources other than their managers, function as substitutes for leadership. Substitutes may also have a direct effect on the outcomes or criteria that make leader behaviors unnecessary. Kerr and Germier described as neutralizers of leadership those characteristics of organizations, tasks, or subordinates that make leadership impossible or ineffective. Such neutralizers can potentially be either harmful or helpful, depending on the situation. But in all cases, their effect is to create a leadership vacuum because by definition, they do not replace leader behaviors with other sources of leadership. Substitutes, by definition, are unlikely to create a leadership vacuum because essentially they duplicate, not negate, leadership behaviors. To complicate matters, the same characteristic may function as a substitute or a neutralizer depending on the type of leader behavior and the situation. Conceptually, both substitutes and neutralizers limit the hierarchical leader's influence on subordinates. In both cases, the formal leader will not be the only or the most important influence on subordinates' behaviors, attitudes, and effectiveness. For example, Hegel argued that it was inherently unfair to compare the leader's impact with the influence of all other possible factors in the subordinate's environment. The critical issue in our study was whether or not a factor created a vacuum or replaced leadership function, but whether or not leader behaviors interacted with characteristics of organizations, tasks, and subordinates. Accordingly, for convenience, characteristics were not classified in terms of substitutes or neutralizers. Instead, they were just considered equivalent moderators. In the study by Kerr and Germier, which was based on existing research, many characteristics were identified that might act as substitutes or neutralizers for leaders initiating structure behaviors and consideration behaviors. However, this list of characteristics was not intended to be a complete enumeration of all theoretically relevant characteristics. For example, Husko identified working in teams as a substitute for leadership. Types of research projects, as opposed to development projects, can also be substitutes for leadership. These factors were not included in the list identified by Kerr and Germier. Specific subordinate characteristics identified by Kerr and Germier included subordinates' abilities, experience, training, and knowledge. Also the need for independence, professional orientation, and indifference to organizational rewards.